the end goal is so that they don't have to exist, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we hold that every single day. And we think about that in terms of how we invest and the support that we provide for our food banks. We are not planning on being here because we know that we can do this if we galvanize and enable enough people to get behind the change that we need to see, and we continue to present evidence about what's going on in our communities and what can make a big difference, then we will be able to end the need for food banks. So we hold that really close, and that's the sort of, you can tell I get really sort of passionate and stubborn about it, because that's what we're here for.
So hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond Funding. Today we're incredibly privileged to be joined by Sophie Carre, Director of Public Engagement for the Trussell Trust. We're going to be talking a bit about the inspiring work that the Trussell Trust is doing in order to tackle poverty across the UK, which of course is a growing issue. So welcome, Sophie. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Hi, it's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was wondering if we could start by talking a bit about who the Trussell Trust are and the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So the Trussell Trust exists so we can all be free from hunger. We're an anti-poverty charity and we're a community of food banks. And together we provide emergency food and practical support to people on the lowest incomes who simply don't have enough money to get by. And we campaign for long-term change because we believe that we can build a better future where nobody needs to access emergency food because everyone has enough income for the essentials and because none of us will allow it. So I suppose our work is centred in three main areas, the first of which is making sure we provide all the support that food banks need to be there for their communities today and to help anyone who needs them right now. The second of which is about connecting across the sector with organisations that can help us provide transformative advice so that we can make it far less likely that someone will need to use a food bank again. And the third of which is about driving change. It's about driving local change in communities, it's about driving policy change, and it's about driving attitudinal change so that we can bring people together to build a more just and a more compassionate society.
So what is the landscape of poverty out there that at the moment that means that, you know, the work that you're doing is so vital?
It's really deeply worrying. So we published some research last summer called the Hunger in the UK, and that indicated that 1 in 7 people in the UK face hunger because they simply don't have enough money. Yeah. 1 in 7. That is unbelievable and devastating. I think last financial year, food banks in our network distributed close to 3 million emergency food parcels, which is the highest number that we've done. And I think what we saw, which was really important to understand, is a real sharp increase in the number of people who needed to turn to a food bank for the first time. And I think 1 million of those parcels went to children.
Wow.
So we know that people are turning to food banks because they simply don't have enough income.
It's a really, really, stark reality, isn't it? That, when so many of them are children as well, that really hits home, doesn't it? That the issues that are going on in society at the moment.
It does. And people are coming, people don't want to turn to a food bank.
No.
People are coming because they simply don't have enough money to live on. And I think almost half of the households who are needing to be referred to a food bank have children under 16 in them.
I'm assuming that quite a lot of the increase that's going on at the moment it can be linked to the cost of living crisis.
I mean, of course, the cost of living crisis has added additional pressure on people's incomes, especially on people on the lowest incomes. But the numbers, sadly, and importantly to understand, the numbers that we share around food bank need are reflective of long-term growth.
Yeah.
So the last numbers that we shared were, I think, 120% higher, so nearly over double what we'd shared 5 years ago. So poverty has been getting broader and deeper for a really long time. And we know that the main driver of that is low income. And overwhelmingly, that's universal credit and social security not being able to keep up with, and actually in fact not being designed to keep up with the cost of living. So that has of course been exacerbated this year, but we've seen this for a really long time. And so that we also know through our Hunger in the UK research, actually, that there are demographics that are overrepresented at food banks and more likely to need support. So we touched already on families being almost half of the households that turn to us, and that's particularly present among single parent families. And then overwhelmingly, 75% of people who are referred to a food bank in our network report that they, or at least one other member of their household, is disabled. So that's
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible overrepresentation, and a huge disservice that we're seeing. So we've seen with disability, with families. Also, we have a huge overrepresentation with people who have caring responsibilities or experience of care, and also with minority ethnic groups and people who are LGBTQ plus. So we know that you're more likely to need a food bank if you're in one of these groups. I mean, I think all of the groups represented particularly highlight how structural and systemic that food bank need is, and some of the root causes behind that. And I think they highlight also not just the systems that need changing, but some of the attitudes that we have in society, and how important it is that we come together and talk about what kind of society and what kind of communities we'd like, and what we think is acceptable in our communities, and how we make sure that people from any background receive the support that they need.
Sophie, following on from that last question, what government support is out there in terms of universal credit, other areas that are helping people that are really struggling?
So there is actually a range of government support available. It just tends to be insufficient and really short term. So we know that the main support available for someone on a low income or someone unable to work is universal credit. And we know that social security payments simply don't keep up with the cost of living. So that's why the Trussell Trust is working alongside the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to call on all political leaders from all parties to commit to an essentials guarantee. So what this means is we're asking that we enshrine in law that social security payments and the level in which it's set is based on the cost of living and can keep up with that. Because fundamentally what we know is when people have enough income, they don't need to turn to a food bank. So alongside Joseph Rowntree and other organisations, we previously campaigned for additional support for cost of living, and the government responded with the cost of living payments. And what was so interesting to see is that when those payments went out, we saw a decrease in food bank need. But because the measure was so short term, the following month need rose again. So it was really helpful in indicating when people have sufficient income, they're not turning to charitable support. That's what we need to tackle. So that's a huge part of our focus at the moment is calling on the government to commit to an essentials guarantee. And of course, another form of support available has been the Household Support Fund, which allows local authorities to make discretionary payments to households on low incomes. And we know what a difference that approach makes. We are really worried that the plan is for that to end in 6 months' time, because we know that it will be our food banks and other charities that are left sort of picking up the pieces when that comes to an end. But we've seen through these short-term measures, it does make a difference. We just need to lock that in and make that a permanent part of how we provide support to people.
It's like you're saying, it's not, I guess the issue has been highlighted because of the cost of living, but essentially, as you say, the poverty has been a growing issue for a long time. So a quick fix isn't going to solve the issue. And as you say, eventually people are going to turn back to food banks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that everyone, regardless of their background or whether or not they're healthy enough to work or they have caring responsibilities, we need to make sure that everyone has a sufficient income to afford the essentials. Because we know at the moment that 5 out of 6 households claiming universal credit are going without at least one essential. So that could be food or being able to turn the heating on. that's 5 out of 6 people.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
massive.
covering everything. So we know that that's really important, and we know that affordable housing is really important, and we know that flexible, secure, well-paid work is important. So these are the spaces that we particularly want to be talking about and advocating for.
Yeah. So how are food banks bridging that gap currently? And are they struggling under this sort of increase in demand as well?
They definitely are. I mean, food banks and the volunteers are absolutely incredible, but I don't think it's ever been this relentless before.
No.
I don't think I've ever seen so many at breaking point before. I think it's been hard for a long time, and the way that they responded to the pandemic was absolutely overwhelmingly brilliant, and heartbreaking in lots of ways as well. The food banks are doing everything that they can. They are so stubbornly determined to support everyone in their communities, but it's really, really, really tough. So I think we saw over the winter that the majority of food banks were having to make adaptations in one way or another to their services simply to meet the level of need. And a big part of that was needing to buy food. So food banks have always been structured with local food supply coming from generous public donations from churches, from schools, from supermarkets. And it's not that the generosity of the public and those groups has gone down in any way.
No.
It's just not kept up with the level of need. So food banks are having to buy, and in some cases, just huge, huge amounts of food to meet the need. But that's been such an operational challenge for food banks this year because they've not been designed to purchase food at that scale so regularly and at a time where food costs more than ever.
What is the Trussell Trust doing to support food banks to make sure that they're getting these essential things that they need to function properly?
So we provide a range of centralised support to food banks in our network. A huge part of that is funding specialist advice and advocacy services in food banks. So this is about ensuring that food banks can employ someone to come in and provide advice on money matters, be that helping manage debt or navigate and access universal credit, which is incredibly complex, and making sure that people access all of the income that they're entitled to. And having those services located in food banks, it's at the right time, it's high quality, it can be transformative. I think since we've been funding these projects within food banks, they've identified over £31 million worth of gains for the people who they've been able to support through these services. And we're seeing that on average, 1 in 4 of the people who've been able to access that service in a food bank has never needed to come back again. So
That's amazing.
it's massive. Another big part of what we're doing to support food banks is supporting that collaboration with other organisations. So we talk a lot at the Trussell Trust about how we're doing this together. We do this in partnership with our food banks. We do this in partnership with our communities, with all different sectors, because we're not going to end the need for food banks if we don't do it together.
No.
It's a real group effort. And so we support collaboration, particularly with the advice sector.
Yeah.
And also with organisations like Mind. So we have a really important partnership with Citizens Advice and Mind, which helps establish our Help Through Hardship helpline. And that's about providing people free bespoke advice in a way that's really accessible and really sustainable. And that really helps food banks in one particular way, which is that people can access support before they need to come to a food bank. And if they do need to come to a food bank, because the helpline can also refer people to a food bank if they need the food as well as the support, that they know that someone's already got that advice by the time. And the helpline can also signpost to local mental health support as well. So it's about this combination of lots of different support factors that really makes a difference.
Because people underestimate actually how much mental health can play into poverty, can't it? Because all these issues do become interlinked. You know, if you've got poor mental health, that can lead to you know, not being able to work, all these kind of things that can lead you down the poverty route. So do you find that working with charities such as Mind is really important in terms of that aspect?
It's incredibly important because we know what pressures people are under when they're coming to a food bank. You know, you're at your most anxious, you don't want to be there, you've reached that point where you've got nowhere left to turn. And so the mental health pressures that people are under by the time that they come to a food bank are enormous. And food banks are seeing that and really want to be able to provide a way to make sure people are better connected. So a big part of the support that we provide food banks as well is driving forward programs that create that capacity for that strategic thinking, for that kind of future focused leadership to identify what the gaps in support are in their communities and help create better pathways for people to access the different support that they might need along that way, whether that's mental health support, or whether that's advice on money matters, or immigration advice, or anything else that they see in their communities is a really big factor. They bring people together who've got lived experience of using those services that can really help advocate for what they know would work. And they bring partners together from lots of different organizations in communities to help find solutions. And they can get really creative in terms of those solutions, and they advocate for what they know will work in their communities, which is absolutely brilliant. And we're seeing that a lot in terms of, could be, for example, like forming a community hub so that people can access all that support in one place in a dignified way, in a way where you can sit down and have a cup of tea and it's compassionate and you can access all the things that you need, which we know makes a huge difference. Or it could be about bringing together people with lived experience and other organizations and groups to advocate for cash first approaches, so that we encourage people to access income before emergency food and make sure that that's kind of front of mind. So there's lots of different ways that we're doing it together.
You talked a lot about collaboration, which is fantastic. And we've been lucky enough to work with you in terms of helping fund certain projects. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what our latest crisis response funding will go towards, and also how important funding like this is.
It's vital. We simply couldn't provide the support that we do to our network without partners like the Benefact Trust. It's incredible, and you've stood alongside us over the past 4 years in some of our busiest, most challenging times, and that makes a huge impact on the level of support we can provide food banks. So the crisis grants that you've helped fund, I've talked a bit about how many different operational pressures are on food banks. That those grants enable food banks to really adapt in a way that they know will be able to keep them going, and be able to cover their increased operational costs, and do what they need to do to make sure they keep the doors open. And that has been absolutely pivotal over the past year and continues to be going forwards. What we need to do is provide the support that food banks tell us that they need. And the crisis support grants help us do that.
Oh, it's honestly a privilege. It's fantastic. I know that everyone at the Trust would say to work with organisations like yourself that are on the front line doing, tackling some of these huge issues that are going on in society. So it's an absolute privilege.
All right, so it really makes a huge difference. And you've also helped fund before our Help Through Hardship helpline, which I've talked about, to help provide that advice, and also helps alleviate some of the pressure on food banks by giving that other avenue, and also the in-person advice. So I think it's about having different options. It's about a holistic approach. We'll always need that communities will always need advice. People will always need advice. And if, when the Trussell Trust closes its doors and we don't need to provide emergency food anymore, if what's left is a really strong advice sector and communities that can advocate and lead, and focus on what's important to them, then that will be, I think, a job well done.
Because that's what's interesting, isn't it? Is because your end goal is to end the need for food banks. So although we're trying to support food banks as much as possible, the end goal is so that they don't have to exist, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we hold that every single day. And we think about that in terms of how we invest and the support that we provide for our food banks. We are not planning on being here because we know that we can do this if we galvanize and enable enough people to get behind the change that we need to see, and we continue to present evidence about what's going on in our communities and what can make a big difference, then we will be able to end the need for food banks. So we hold that really close, and that's the sort of, you can tell I get really sort of passionate and stubborn about it, because that's what we're here for.
And you mentioned off camera that awareness is so important, isn't it? So raising awareness of people that perhaps aren't going to food banks but need to have this awareness of the support that they're actually offering in terms of advice, food support, but also just those touch points that people can reach out to if they are in need.
It's really important that we raise awareness. I always want to raise awareness of the incredible work that our food banks do, but it's in communities across the UK, people are struggling to survive. People are struggling to afford the bare essentials that we need to get by. And we all need to understand that. And so the more that we can talk about what's happening in communities, the more that we can talk about the solutions that we know will make a difference, that's when we start to see real change happening, because we're bringing together lots of different people from different communities, from different sectors, to collaborate, and doing it in partnership with people who've got real lived experience of poverty and of using food banks. We're designing services together and solutions together, that hopefully we can make last and focus on not short-term responses, but a long-term approach to how we support the most vulnerable in our society.
So if people wanted to find out more about the Trussell Trust and the work that you're doing, what's the kind of best platforms for them to use?
Absolutely, I would encourage anyone who wants to find out more to go to our website, trusselltrust.org, and have a look around, or to check out our social channels to see what we're talking about. And then if you can, and you've got the capacity to go and find your local food bank and go and see if you can donate food, or if there's anything that you can do to support them or get involved.
Thank you so much for watching another episode of Beyond Funding. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels so you don't miss out on future episodes. And if you want to find out more about Benefact Trust, visit benefacttrust.co.uk.